There are places where you should never stop your car, and windows you should never look into. In today's episode of Bedtime Chillers, we've gathered 3 of our most terrifying true stories. We visit one of the world's most haunted hospitals, a castle so evil that no one dares to enter, and a cabin hiding a dark face in the night. Turn off the lights, lock the doors, and get under the covers, because you're watching Bedtime Chillers. There are places in Sweden where silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, as if the air carries memories it cannot bear to let go of. We find ourselves deep within Norrbotten, surrounded by miles of endless forests. Here, isolated from the outside world, rises one of the country's most magnificent and most feared buildings, Sandtrask Sanatorium. When this colossus opened its gates in 1931, it was a symbol of hope and modern science. It was here that the White Death, tuberculosis, which was eating its way through the Swedish population, was to be defeated. But for thousands of people, this did not become the place where they got their lives back. It became the place where it ended. The walls here have seen more death than most battlefields. And the question we ask ourselves today is simple, yet terrifying. What happens to the energy of thousands of people who died in anguish and breathlessness? Does it just disappear? Or does it remain in the concrete, in the corridors, and in the dark windows, gazing out over the forest? This is Bedtime Chillers. Turn off the lights, lock the door, and crawl under the covers, because tonight we are entering Sandtrask Sanatorium. Before we pass through these heavy doors, I just want to say thank you. We are starting to become a large group now, sharing an interest in the unknown, for the places Sweden has forgotten, from Venice Church to the child murderer's cross. If you are new here, and if you dare to join us in the darkness, hit that subscribe button now. It helps me find more places like this. And please, leave a comment. Have you ever visited a sanatorium yourself, or a place that just felt wrong? I read everything you write. Now let's turn back the clock to a time when a cough was the sound no one wanted to hear. To understand why people are so afraid of this place today, we must understand what everyday life looked like back then. Tuberculosis was a ghastly disease. It ate up the lungs from the inside. You became tired, pale, gaunt, and eventually coughed up blood. There was no cure. The only thing they could do was isolate the sick, give them fresh air and nutritious food, and hope the body had the strength to fight. Sandtrask was its own little town. There was a bakery, a school, a cinema, and housing for the staff. But everything revolved around death. The large, open-air wards, traces of which you can see on the facade, were filled with beds. There, patients lay for hours, wrapped in blankets in the Nordic cold, to breathe clean air. Imagine the psychological pressure. You lie in a ward with 10 others. At night, you hear the person in the bed next to you have a coughing fit that never seems to end. Then, it goes silent. And in the morning, staff arrive and roll out a covered gurney. The bed is remade. A new patient is admitted. The cycle begins again. It is said that over 15,000 patients passed through these doors. Many of them never checked out. And it is precisely this, the enormous amount of tragedy in one single place, that has laid the foundation for the testimonies that still pour in today. Because Sandtrask is not empty. Let's talk about what people actually see here. Because it's not just vague feelings, there are concrete recurring sightings from visitors, contractors, and the curious who have made their way here. The most famous phenomenon concerns the nurse. There are countless stories of a woman in an old-fashioned uniform. She wears the typical starched cap and a long apron that rustles as she walks. A man who visited the site a few years ago recounted standing in one of the long corridors on the second floor. It was the middle of the day, but dim inside. At the far end of the corridor, he saw a woman walking at a fast pace. He first thought it was another visitor, perhaps someone filming a movie. He called out, "Hello," but she didn't react. She turned into one of the old patient wards. When the man reached the door just seconds later, the room was completely empty. There was no other exit. Some say she still walks her rounds today, that she doesn't know the hospital is closed. She checks on patients who died 80 years ago. Sometimes, it is said, you can hear the sound of a keychain rattling against her hip, or the distinct, echoing sound of hard heels against the stone floor, even though you are standing completely still. But there are testimonies far more unsettling than a dutiful nurse. We must talk about the windows. Sandtrask is a massive building, and standing down on the ground looking up at the top floors, many get a feeling of being watched. For many, it is not imagination. There are photos and there are stories of faces pressed against the glass. A group of local youths were here late one autumn evening. They sat in their car outside, engine running, shining their high beams at the facade. They recount seeing a dark silhouette in one of the windows on the third floor. A figure standing completely still, looking down at them. What frightened them was that the figure didn't seem to be standing at the window, but hovering a bit up, as if the floor inside was higher than it should be, or as if the person was hanging. They left immediately. Other testimonies speak of the man in the coat, a tall, dark figure often seen standing at the forest edge, exactly where the sanatorium grounds end and the wilderness begins. He seems to guard the area. One theory is that it is an old caretaker or doctor who doesn't want strangers disturbing the peace. Then we have the children. Tuberculosis spared no one, not even the youngest. There were children's wards here, and these are perhaps the saddest testimonies we have. Visitors have reported the sound of children's laughter echoing in the stairwells, sometimes the sound of a ball bouncing, thump, thump, thump. But when you follow the sound, there is nothing there, only dust and peeling paint. A woman who was here on a guided tour swore she felt a small, cold hand grab her fingers as she walked through a dark passage. She thought it was her own child, but when she looked down, no one was there. Her child was standing several meters away. But there is a part of Sandtrask that is darker than the others, literally and figuratively. The tunnels and the mortuary. Beneath the building is a system of passages. This is where they transported laundry, food, and bodies. They didn't want the living patients to see how many were actually dying, so the dead were transported away through the basement, out to the chapel. It is down here that the atmosphere changes, from sadness to pure terror. People who have dared to go down into the tunnels speak of a suffocating feeling, as if the air is running out. There are testimonies of hearing the squeaking sound of wagon wheels, the squeak of a gurney being rolled over the concrete, closer and closer. A witness described hearing heavy dragging footsteps behind him in the tunnel. When he stopped, the steps stopped. When he started walking, the steps started again. He ran out and refused to go down again. Is it the echo of the thousands of transports to the mortuary we hear? The energy of the final journey? Wandering through San Trask today, you are struck by the contrast. It is beautiful, almost palatial, but at the same time, incredibly broken. Wallpaper hanging in strips, rusty bed frames, abandoned medical records. It's as if time has stopped, but the inhabitants never moved out. One of the most specific and eerie stories I have found concerns the lady in red. She is rarely seen, but when she is, she leaves no one unaffected. According to legend, she was a patient who was deeply unhappy, perhaps not only over her illness, but over a lost love. She is said to appear in the window on the gable, but unlike the other shadows, she is described in color, a red dress or shawl. She doesn't wave, she doesn't scream, she just cries. Several independent witnesses have said they heard a woman crying hysterically from inside a specific room, but when they opened the door, the crying stopped abruptly. Only a scent hangs remaining. A scent of old medicines and something sweet, almost like rotting flowers. What is it we experience in a place like San Trask? Are they ghosts in the classic sense? Souls that are stuck? Or is it what parapsychologists call residual hauntings, recorded memories? Imagine that the walls, the stone, and the concrete act like a videotape. Strong emotions, anguish, pain, fear of death might be such powerful energies that they etch themselves into the material. And under the right conditions, the environment replays these scenes again. The nurse walks her rounds again and again for eternity. The gurney rolls toward the chapel, night after night. That would explain why they don't react to us. We are not there for them. They are trapped in their own time, in their own loop of suffering. But then we have those other moments when someone looks you in the eyes from a window on the third floor, when the footsteps in the basement stop when you stop. Then it doesn't feel like a recording. Then it feels like contact. We will soon leave San Trask for this time, but I want to ask you one thing. If you ever visit this place, or places like Venice or Bolberget, do it with respect. This is not just a haunted house for our entertainment. It is a graveyard, a place where mothers, fathers, and children took their last rattling breaths far from home. Perhaps that is why they remain, because they don't want to be alone.
Do you know what your home sounds like when you sleep?
You think you do. You recognize the hum of the refrigerator kicking in, the radiators ticking in the cold, or the house settling in the wind. Those are safe sounds, the sounds of solitude. But have you ever woken up and heard a sound that doesn't belong in the rhythm of the house? A sound that is too organic, like the sound of fabric dragging against a threshold, or a muffled breath that isn't your own.
This story was submitted by a person
who has chosen to remain anonymous, but I will call him Jimmy and his partner Sarah in the story. Turn off the lights, lock the door, and crawl under the covers because this is a truly creepy story.
It was the middle of July
when my girlfriend Sarah and I rented the cabin. It was located in northern Värmland at the end of a gravel road that the grass had started to reclaim. On paper, it was a dream cabin. Timber walls, moss on the roof, and no cell service for miles. We needed it. Sarah had hit the wall that spring, and I needed to get away from the city noise. When we walked in, the smell hit us. It smelled of old wood and soft soap, but there was another, fainter scent underneath. Something musty, like wet clothes forgotten in a bag. We aired it out and didn't think more of it. The layout was simple: a large living room with a kitchen, a bedroom, and the small hallway. But in the hallway, there was a detail that felt wrong. A heavy door, painted in peeling grey paint, led down to the basement. It had no handle. Instead, a sturdy hasp was mounted on the outside, locked with a large, rusty padlock. When I texted the landlord, just before we lost signal, I got the reply: "Basement is private. Just old garden tools and junk. Don't worry about it." So we placed our suitcases in front of the door, like a barrier, and started our vacation. But the first night, I slept poorly. I woke up repeatedly to the house creaking, not the usual ticks. This sounded like weight, like someone carefully shifting their center of gravity from one foot to the other. The sound came from below, under the floor. It rained the entire second day. We were stuck inside, and I found the guest book in a drawer under the coffee table. It was thick, with yellowed pages. I started reading aloud to Sarah to lighten the mood. The first years, from the early 90s, were idyllic. "Thanks for a wonderful week. The fishing was great. What a hidden gem." But around 2015, something happened with the entries. There were no direct complaints, more strange observations. A family from Gothenburg wrote, "The cabin is nice, but we don't understand why the furniture moves. Didn't the armchair stand closer to the window yesterday?" I flipped further. A couple of pages later, dated 2018. "We can't find our food. A packet of coffee and 2 cans of soup are gone. We might have left it in the car, but I'm sure I put it in the pantry." Sarah laughed a little nervously. "Probably ghosts," she said, and took a sip of wine. But I didn't laugh, because I saw a pattern. The closer to the present I got, the more desperate the texts became. The handwriting was often shaky, the sentences short. An entry from last autumn made my stomach turn. It was written in pencil, pressed so hard the paper had almost torn. "He stands by the tree line. He watches us when we eat, but when we go out, he's gone. And why is the basement padlock scratched on the inside of the shackle?" I paused. "Scratched on the inside?" I walked out into the hall. I crouched down in front of the basement door and shone my phone light on the padlock. Sure enough, on the inside of the silver shackle were fresh, deep scratches, as if someone had manipulated the lock often. And right at the threshold, in the gap between the door and the floor, I saw something white. I pulled it out with my fingernails. It was a receipt from a gas station 20 miles away, dated 2 days ago. We hadn't been to that gas station.
"Sarah," I said.
My voice trembled. "We have to leave. Now." She thought I was joking at first, but when she saw my face, she understood. Just as we started throwing our clothes into the bags, It happened. The power went out. It didn't just get dark, it became pitch black. The rain battered the roof like gunshots. "It's probably just a fuse," Sarah whispered, but she held tight to my arm. We fumbled our way to the window facing the back, towards the forest edge. Lightning lit up the sky for a second, and in the cold glare, we saw him. He stood exactly where the guest book had warned, by the tree line, a tall, gaunt figure. He wore a raincoat that was far too big, and the hood was pulled up, hiding his face in shadow. He stood completely still, arms hanging straight down. He wasn't looking at the forest. He was looking straight into our window. "Who the hell is that?" Sarah screamed. Then it went dark again. I turned on my phone flashlight and shone it out. He was gone. But then we heard the sound. Not from outside, but from inside the house. It came from the kitchen. A soft, whistling sound. A melody. Someone was whistling. Slowly. We rushed toward the front door. I yanked the handle, but to my horror, something heavy was placed against the door from the outside. The whistling in the kitchen ceased. Instead, we heard heavy, wet footsteps approaching the hallway. Squelch. Squelch. It sounded like boots soaked in mud. We backed into the bedroom and slammed the door. I dragged the dresser in front of the door as a barricade. Sarah was crying silently in the corner. I stood with a candlestick in my hand, ready to kill whoever it was. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. The handle was pressed down. The dresser shook as the door was pushed against it. Then, silence. A minute passed. 2. Then we heard a voice. It was raspy, dry, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. It didn't come through the door. It came from the floor. Right by my foot was a knothole in one of the wide floorboards. The voice whispered directly from underneath. So close, I could feel the vibrations in the wood. "You forgot to write in the book." Then I understood. He wasn't outside. He had never been outside. The man at the tree line we saw in the lightning, that was just a distraction. Maybe a mannequin, or he had run inside faster than we thought. He lived here, under us, the whole time, and he had keys to everything. We heard the basement door out in the hall creak open, but not because he was going down, but because he was coming up.
I don't know how we managed.
But pure terror gives you superhuman strength. I smashed the window pane with the candlestick. We jumped. The glass cut up my hands, and Sarah sprained her ankle landing. But we ran. We ran through the dark forest, in the rain, without shoes, without jackets. We ran until we saw the light from a farmhouse 2 miles away. The police arrived an hour later with a dog patrol. The cabin was empty when they got there, but the basement door stood wide open. Down there, they found his home. A mattress, a bucket, and shelves full of stolen goods, canned food, clothes, and keys, hundreds of keys, and the guest book. He had retrieved it from the living room and taken it down. He had written a final entry on the last page, dated that same evening. "Thanks for the visit. Sarah looks very pretty when she sleeps." They never caught him. He knew the woods too well. He vanished without a trace. But what keeps me awake at night isn't the thought that he saw us. It's the thought of all the other cabins out there, all the other guest books. Last week, when Sarah and I were in a store to buy new winter jackets, I saw a shelf with notebooks. On the cover of one of them, someone had scribbled in pencil, small and indistinct, See you soon. I don't know if it was him. I don't know if I'm imagining it. But I know one thing. I will never, ever again rent a cabin where a door is locked from the outside.
A huge thank you to Jimmy for your story.
Now I need your help. Do you have any scary stories to share? Or do you know of any haunted places I should investigate? Feel free to comment,
Sleep tight now.
if you can.
He was gone for less than a minute. When they pulled him up, he was a stranger. The man they lowered into the darkness was a young, strong prisoner who was sentenced to death. The man they pulled up had snow-white hair, deep wrinkles, in a face contorted by an indescribable terror. He had aged 30 years in the few seconds he was out of sight. He died only 2 days later in a mental hospital without ever being able to articulate what it was he saw down there in the depths. He was the first to explore the hole, and he was the last they ever let do it. Welcome to Bedtime Chillers and the series World's Most Haunted Places. We are starting our new series strong, with a fortress that was not built to keep enemies out, but to keep something in. We are going to the dense forests of the Czech Republic, about 47 kilometers north of Prague. We are going to Hauska Castle, the place that, according to centuries of folklore, is not a castle, but a seal against the other side, a lock built to seal a gate, the gate to hell. Turn off the lights, lock the door, and crawl under the covers. You are watching Bedtime Chillers. On the surface, Hauska is a prime example of early Gothic architecture. It is one of the best preserved castles of its time. The officially accepted history tells that it was built during the second half of the 13th century, probably between 1253 and 1278, on the orders of the powerful Bohemian King Ottokar II. The purpose, according to historians, was to serve as a royal administrative center to be able to manage the king's extensive estates and lands in the region. Another theory is that the house was first built as a prison. That sounds logical until you look closer at it, until you actually visit the place, because the moment you arrive, the official story begins to fall apart. A fortress, or even a simple administrative center in the 13th century, had several fundamental needs. They needed to be strategically located, and they needed to be able to sustain themselves. Hauska fulfills neither of these requirements, which makes you wonder what the real purpose was. If we start by looking at the location itself, the castle is not located near any significant trade route. It guards no border. It is isolated in an inhospitable landscape of dense forests, mountains, and swamps. There is no obvious strategic reason to build a royal castle right here. The second is the infrastructure, and that is even worse. The castle completely lacks a natural water source. There is no well, no river. The only water source was a cistern built to collect rainwater, which was completely insufficient to withstand a siege. Furthermore, there is also no evidence of an original kitchen. It was not built for people to live there. The third is the architecture. This is one of the most significant pieces of evidence. Hauska Castle has no outer fortifications. The castle's main defensive walls are not directed outward toward an attacking enemy, but they are directed inward toward the courtyard's center. Many of the windows on the upper floors are fake. They are just facades, blocked from the inside by thick stone walls. So we have a castle with no water, no food, no strategic value, and with walls facing the wrong way. The official history calls it an administrative center or a prison. The folklore knows better. It says that Ottokar II did not build this as an office or a prison. He built a prison cell. He built a lock over the abyss that the local population feared more than anything else. To understand Hauska, one must understand what was there before Hauska was built. The legend of the place is much older than the castle itself. Before the first stone was laid, there was a cliff in a dense, impenetrable forest, and in that cliff there was a large crack, a hole straight down into the ground. This was not just any cave. The locals called it the hole to hell. It was said to be completely bottomless. No one could ever see the bottom, no matter how deep they let their ropes run. The villagers in the area were terrified of the place and avoided it at all costs after dark, and they had good reason. From this abyss, it was said that horrific things crawled and flew during the night. Testimonies speak of dark, winged creatures, but worst of all were the hybrids, creatures described as half animal and half human. These demonic creatures were said to have slaughtered livestock in the surrounding villages and dragged both animals and humans down into the dark hole. Some legends even claimed that those who got too close to the hole risked being transformed into one of these creatures themselves. In desperation, the villagers tried to fill the hole. They dragged heavy boulders to it and hurled them into the abyss, day after day, and it was completely futile. The hole swallowed everything that came its way. No matter how much stone they threw, the depths never seemed to fill up. It was then, once the construction of a fortress began, that the terrible experiment took place. The king or the duke wanted to know exactly what it was they were trying to seal. A prisoner condemned to death was offered a pardon in exchange for a single task: to allow himself to be lowered on a rope into the abyss and report everything he saw. He gladly accepted the offer. They tied the rope around him and began to lower him into the bottomless darkness. He was only out of sight for a few seconds before the screams began to pierce the air. Terrified, inhuman screams that echoed up from the depths of... They pulled him up in a panic. The man they got back, as you know, was unrecognizable. A young man had aged 30 years. His hair was white, his face a mask of terror, and he died shortly thereafter. This was not just a cave with monsters. The prisoner's fate suggested something much worse. It suggested a place where time and space, the very fabric of reality, was completely dissolved. A place that didn't just kill the body, but that could consume an entire life, an entire soul, in just an instant. When the prisoner died, it was clear. The hole could not be filled. It had to be sealed. And if stone was not enough, something even stronger was needed. They needed a fortress, and they needed God. The solution was as desperate as it was ingenious. King Ottokar II built the castle, but not to live in. He built it as a massive, permanent lock. The thickest walls, the strongest reinforcements, were placed facing inward to hold back, with brute force, whatever was in the hole. And right over the abyss itself, as the final spiritual seal, he had the castle's chapel built. This was not just any chapel, it was an act of theological warfare. The chapel is dedicated to the Archangel Michael. The choice was anything but random. In Christian mythology, Michael is the leader of God's armies, the heavenly warrior who personally defeated Lucifer in the Great War in heaven and cast him and his fallen angels into the abyss. By building the chapel, they were placing the most powerful demon fighter in the Christian faith as an eternal sentinel directly on top of the portal. The murals in the chapel are among the most disturbing in Europe. They are worn by centuries, but still show scenes of battle, demon-like figures and unholy left-handed figures. But the seal was not perfect. It was under constant pressure. To this day, witnesses report one of the castle's most inexplicable physical phenomena. The walls of the chapel always seem to be damp, even during periods of severe drought, as if an ice-cold, evil vapor is ceaselessly sweating through the holy stone. The spiritual seal also has a price. It is said to have given rise to this castle's most famous specter, an eternal guardian bound to his post. Visitors and staff report a terrifying figure, a tall black monk completely without a face. He is seen patrolling the silent corridors, not necessarily malevolent, but part of the castle's dark, eternal guard. A castle built to contain evil perhaps inevitably became a magnet for those who did not want to keep it contained, but rather try to exploit it. Hauska's history is not just a fight against the darkness, but a fight for control over the darkness. During the chaotic 30 Years' War in the 17th century, the castle was occupied by a Swedish mercenary and commander named Oronto, and Oronto was no ordinary soldier. He was, according to legend, a devout practitioner of the black arts and alchemy. He was well aware of the castle's reputation, and unlike the villagers, he was not afraid. He was interested. He moved into Hauska specifically to harness the dark energy he believed flowed from the portal. He locked himself in his laboratory night after night, trying, with the help of the castle's power, to distill the elixir of life to achieve eternal life. Some versions of the legend are darker, claiming that he performed demonic rituals and even human sacrifices to appease the power beneath the chapel. The local villagers, who already feared the castle, now became terrified of Oronto's experiments. They pooled their money and hired 2 local hunters, or perhaps we should call them assassins, to put an end to the madness. They broke into the castle and murdered him. In the midst of his unholy work, Oronto never got his eternal life, but he is said to have received an eternal imprisonment. His vengeful spirit seems to be one of the most active in the castle, forever searching for the ingredients he never found. Several centuries later, an even darker power was drawn to Hauska. During the Second World War, from 1939 to 1945, the castle was located in the German-occupied territory. It was seized and used by the German army, specifically by Heinrich Himmler's SS. Once again, the same paradox arises. The castle had absolutely no strategic value, so why were the Nazis there? The answer seems to be the same as Oronto's. Himmler and the SS leadership were deeply obsessed with the occult and with mystical artifacts. They knew Hauska's legends. They were there on an industrial and systematic scale to try to tame and exploit the power of hell to win the war. Local residents from that time reported dark ceremonies, strange lights coming from the castle at night, and terrible sounds. There are 2 main theories about the Nazi activities, and they do not necessarily exclude each other. One is that they conducted occult experiments, and it is said, among other things, that Himmler ordered the SS soldiers to dig up the gate to the Devil's Hole. The second, more mundane but equally ominous, is that the SS used Hauska as a secure warehouse, but they weren't storing weapons or gold. They were storing parts of their stolen libraries, thousands and thousands of priceless books on the occult, witchcraft, and black magic that they had confiscated from all over Europe. The truth likely lies in a combination. Imagine this: the most ruthless organization in modern history, in possession of the world's largest collection of occult instruction manuals, at the very place known for centuries as the Gate of Hell. They weren't just storing books, they were studying them and practicing them. When the tide of war turned and the Allies approached, the SS destroyed all records of their activities at the castle and filled in the gate to hell. They also laid landmines throughout the entire area. To this day, over 75 years later, the castle's current owners have not dared to conduct any large-scale excavations in the basement for fear of hidden mines. With all the evidence destroyed, we will likely never know what the Nazis actually did at the castle during those years. Hauska opened to the public in 1999 and is today a popular tourist attraction. But being a tourist destination has not silenced the darkness. Quite the opposite. The place is a global hotspot for paranormal investigators and ghost hunters. The most persistent and terrifying testimonies are the sound phenomena. Visitors, guides, and investigators all report the same thing: the sound of screams, and most specifically, the sound of claws scraping against stone. And where do these sounds come from? Well, from under the chapel floor. The sound of something that was sealed away over 800 years ago and is still tirelessly trying to dig its way out. Besides the sounds, the list of recurring phenomena is long and bizarre. There are the shadows said to roam the castle's corridors, the remnants from an abyss that the castle was built upon to seal. The faceless monk is a dark figure, sometimes seen in the cellars. Some legends say he is the eternal guardian of the gate, a monk still patrolling his post to warn of what lies below. Witnesses have seen him floating silently, as if looking for something, before vanishing as he approaches the stairs. The White Lady, one of the castle's more tragic figures. She is described as a young woman in a white dress, often seen on the third floor, or as a grieving figure in one of the uppermost windows. Her story is believed to be one of lost love and betrayal. She is said to wander in eternal sorrow. Several other observers have reported the sight of a large black horse galloping silently across the inner courtyard. The sight is made even more gruesome by the fact that the horse has no head, and some testimonies describe how blood gushes from the severed neck. And perhaps the most disturbing is the creature that has haunted visitors and investigators for decades. It is often described as a human frog, a twisted hybrid between human, frog, and sometimes even dog or bulldog. This creature is said to move, crouching through the castle's dark corners, sometimes growling or grunting to itself. Many believe that this is not a ghost in the traditional sense, but one of the demonic human beasts that, according to legend, crawled up from the abyss before the chapel was built to seal it. This last observation is also the most frightening. The original 13th century legend speaks of half-animal, half-human hybrids that crawled up from the hole. The modern-day reports of a frog-human are not a new haunting. It is a direct confirmation of the original myth. It is proof that the seal is not, and perhaps never has been, completely tight. The castle has become popular among paranormal investigators globally. Famous international teams like Ghost Hunters International and Sweden's own Spukjakt Ghost Hunt have all investigated the site, and their conclusions are eerily consistent. The results are not just sporadic, but consistent. The pattern is clear. Technology that has just been fully charged fails the moment it is taken into specific rooms. Cameras freeze, audio recorders go silent, and batteries drain completely in seconds. The phenomenon even extends beyond the walls. There are multiple reports of cars parked in the courtyard that suddenly refuse to start, as if an invisible force is shutting down the electronics. Animals react with instinctive terror. Dogs that are normally calm become completely panicked, barking aggressively at empty corners or refusing outright to set foot over the threshold to the chapel. Several investigations, including a noted Czech one in 2014, have presented remarkable findings. They reported particular success in capturing EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, where clear whispers and answers seem to come from thin air. During one séance, they recorded 2 deafening, unexplained bangs that echoed from inside the locked and verifiably empty chapel. Perhaps most frightening was when one of their rigged stationary cameras was suddenly and violently moved physically, as if an invisible hand had shoved it aside. But there was nothing in the room. The activity seems to consistently culminate around 3 in the morning, which is known in the paranormal world as the demonic hour. A well-known story from an investigation tells of a reporter who was monitoring the chapel. Suddenly, at exactly 3 a.m., both his heart rate monitor and his walkie-talkie died instantly. At the same time, his mobile phone, which was lying untouched on the table next to him, had its alarm mysteriously reset and activated right before his eyes. Hauska Castle is a castle built of fear. Officially, it is an administrative center or a prison from the 13th century, a historical monument of stone and mortar. But the folklore, the bizarre architecture, and 8 centuries of uninterrupted testimonies tell a completely different story about the place. A story of a bottomless abyss, of demonic hybrids, and of a desperate attempt to lock hell on Earth. Generations of darkness have been drawn to this place, from the Black Magician Oronto to Himmler's SS. They have all wanted to pick the lock, to open what King Ottokar II desperately tried to close. The true horror of Hauska Castle is not that it is a gate to hell. It is that 800 years ago, people were so completely bottomlessly convinced that it was, that they built an entire fortress with the lock on the inside, and the scraping sounds from the chapel floor make us all ask the final terrible question. What if they were right? This was Hauska Castle, considered by many to be one of the world's most haunted places. I hope you all are looking forward to this series of exploring haunted places around the world. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe and like the video. Until next time, sleep well if you can.